Peace, everyone. So today I have a very awesome guest, a fantastic guest with us. This is Tim Ozman. He is the host of Infinite Plane Radio, and I've been a long time listener, long time subscriber. And the reason I brought him along is because he has been at the cutting edge of conspiracy analysis, mainstream media deconstruction for a long time, since 2017. He's the president of the Infinite Plane Society, and he's been the project manager for a number of publicity stunts, performance art events, and he has, I think, one of the best growing think tanks comprised of like-minded individuals. So he has a show, he goes live, and his show explores unconventional, fringe, and often conspiracy laden perspectives. And he adds his unique flavor of contrarian thought, well thought out uh, analysis. Um, his focus spans simulation theory, media deconstruction, space age skepticism, and, like us, esoteric takes on world events. Now, many here are Muslim, and we understand the importance of discernment in an age of deception. And Tim's work aligns with this ethos, right? He peels back layers of illusions to reveal truths often buried beneath the noise. So, inshallah, this discussion promises to connect his perspective with our own intellectual framework. And the central themes of this interview would be media as a psyop, challenging mainstream cosmology, space exploration narratives, exploring the idea of reality as a construct, um, social engineering, discussing controlled opposition, shaping cultural shaping, predictive programming, and decoding symbolism in current events, in pop culture, in architecture. Tim is very skeptical. He's a highly skeptical person, and he's also very provocative, but well rooted in well researched fringe theories. So I encourage you guys to interact. The floor is open. And without further ado, we have Tim.
Hey, thank you for having me on, and I appreciate the thorough introduction. And
Appreciate
I'm
it.
glad to hear that you've been a long-time listener. I put in my notes here, you said 2021, which
Correct.
gives me a good idea of where we were at the time, because this think tank has gone through some changes. I think for the most part, permutations and iterations that signify progress. I think we've actually made a great deal of progress, especially since 2020. So 2021 to now has just been a refinement of our methodology here. And you mentioned being Muslim,
Correct.
and I'm often critical of religion in principle. However,
I'm
I
aware.
want,
Yeah.
but I want to point out that it was my delving into the spiritual that led me to look at worldly deceptions. So even though I am primarily focused on the objective breakdown of mass media, I'm very well aware that there may be other levels to this thing, but we're merely reacting to it at the material level right here. And so I don't hand wave that stuff away. It's just not my focus. But just to kind of set the stage there with that.
Understood. Okay. So let's just introduce you to the audience. A lot of my listeners are aware of you, but for those who aren't, uh, what inspired you to start Infinite Plane Radio? And how has your philosophy evolved since its inception?
My initial interest in even speaking about any of this stuff became kind of an obsession, but it really started with the Charleston shooting, where Dylan Roof shot up a church. And I noticed not only anomalies that made me question it, but I noticed that the shooter seemed to fit a number of stereotypes. And my first thought was, this has to be a manufactured character because all the pictures, all the photos reiterated this theme of right wing, toxic masculinity. It's all thrown in there. And I looked at it, the faker I thought it was. And so I reached out to Jim Fetzer, who at that time was doing a lot of videos highly critical of mass shooting events and terror attacks. And after talking to him for about an hour about this, I thought, this is actually something that I'm very interested in expanding on. So I would say that it was the Charleston shooting that really got me looking into it, along with all the other shootings that are very popularly discussed today.
Hmm. And so I'm guessing the way the mainstream media covered Dylan Roof, and this is what kind of made you question mainstream narratives. Like, did you just start thinking, okay, these guys aren't giving us the full story, or was it more of a incremental kind of realization?
At first, I thought it was partisan. So, in
Okay.
other words, I think it was somebody
Oh, by the
mentioned the
way,
mic.
yeah, now it's way better. Wow. It was okay for me. My standards are, but it's way better now. Yeah.
Okay, well, I'm glad. Armin Reed, thank you for mentioning that. And I went ahead and fixed it. The default is the computer mic, and I had to, or webcam mic, and I had to switch it. But
Okay.
so back to your question, when I first started looking at these events, I didn't see the big picture. I thought, okay, the Democrats are staging events to influence public opinion to be more receptive to their views on guns. And I thought it was partisan, which in a way politicized me. And I thought the Democrat media complex was orchestrating events to influence people their way. And that was I guess that was my framework for a couple of years.
Mm.
But then, as things progressed, I started to note that there wasn't any kind of pushback against the obvious fakery from the people on the right, the gun manufacturers who were getting sued for tens of millions of dollars. And I thought, how come
Mhm.
they can't figure this stuff out? And it gradually dawned on me that no, actually, both sides participate in psychological operations, and neither side calls out the fakery. They all treat it as real. So that's when I realized, okay, there's collusion, and partisan politics is theater.
Okay. So let me just ask you, how do you define the term infinite plane? Like, is it a purely physical concept, or does it have a more philosophical implication?
Good question, and it's mostly philosophical because when we started this, when I started the channel, it really was oriented around the topic of space, NASA
Mhm.
fakery, and the flat Earth topic. And I saw that the Flat Earth Society had already this model of the Earth as like a disc with
Mhm.
like a bowl on top floating in space. And I thought, how do they know? No one's been to the edge. They're prematurely arriving at that conclusion. And I saw that this was a similar error to just trusting the model given to us by the establishment when you have found various aspects of it to be phony. So I thought both sides are arguing from a place of ignorance. We need more information. So I said, well, we
Mhm.
can't prematurely say it's 25K miles in circumference, nor can we say there's an edge. There needs to be more information. So the idea of infinite plane society was it's infinite until proven otherwise. And infinite to proven otherwise, meaning there always has to be room for more information. It shouldn't be a
Mhm.
closed system of information, which is what we're in. And so the
Mhm.
title Infinite Plane Society was meant to actually contradict the idea of the Flat Earth Society. But
Okay.
more to your question, though, it's not really about physically. Am I asserting this is a infinite plane? No, but it's more about the idea of an open system, open mind. So if your worldview has false explanations, it might actually limit your perspective. And one of the things I've been pointing out consistently is how false explanations kill curiosity. So what's defined
Mhm.
infinite plane society has been the rejection of proven claims or maybe even unfalsifiable models, and the suspension of judgment until we have more information, meaning continually investigating and looking deeper. And that's what we have been doing from the very beginning in a number of different areas. And I think that the think tank has evolved. So we're no longer, I don't think in any way, we're no longer considered part of Trutherville, like mainstream alternative media, because we formed a group that is already aware of the existence of not only individual psyops, but rather how widespread the fakery is, the big picture, which you wouldn't see if you're still caught up in the partisan politics.
By the way, guys, we are looking at. I like this. This was from election day. Tim actually went on the field to confront voters with with a literal reality check. But most people, being NPC, kind of just weren't really engaging. But I like this. This is from his channel. I have his channel, his Substack, everything on in the description box. So make sure to subscribe. So Tim, speaking about media deconstruction and control, you often speak about predictive programming. Now, what's the most compelling example you've seen, either recently or in general?
Okay, I'm glad you brought this up because this is a topic that's widely recognized, but very poorly understood. And I think that this think tank put it into its proper context. We've identified what we're really looking at. So I would define predictive programming as a form of foreshadowing and advertising for future fake news events. And it exists in the form of, well, on various, I guess you would say, platforms. You find it in books, you find it in different media. It's in the video games, definitely in the big movies. But it's also happening on the world stage with just regular people on the news. And what I'm suggesting here is that there's a monolithic control over media globally, to use that word. Some people don't like it, but I'm talking about the world we live in has a monolithic media presence that may look like it's separate and it's divided, but ultimately it does comport to one singular worldview. And that's what we've been really pointing out here, is that there is this singular worldview, and everything that we see on the news when it comes to significant events that get written in the history books as reported, even though we may poke holes in the stories, these events, which I would say are mostly contrived. And we can go into specifics. I'm not saying all news is fake, but I'm saying that the major events that change our collective worldview are generally staged. And the purpose of this is that they are writing history, making history with fake news. So fake news is not just about partisan politics, left and right, and bias. Fake news is about simulated historic events, which are then accepted as real, and they go into the history books, and nobody cares what the conspiracy theorists say. And in order for this to work, all these staged news events are actually foreshadowed. And when I say all, it's all. You'll rarely find examples of any exception. And it's actually a purposeful synchronization between all of the media at large and future fake news events for the purpose of conditioning people to accept it as real. I think we all know the adage from Orwell about who controls the present controls the future, controls the past.
Yes,
And the power elite use media, the government-controlled media, to control the present and thereby the past and the future. There's a purposeful entrainment that's going on between the future fake news and everything that comes before. And a good example that I think kind of encompasses all of this is the Trump shooting, but specifically how it relates to the predictive programming world. So while Trump was on trial leading up to 7/13, there was an appearance by Robert De Niro outside the courthouse, totally deranged, Trump deranged. And when I saw him there, I said, hey, this guy is not just some random Trump deranged celebrity ranting. He has to have some significance because this is all world stage theater. So we looked into it. and we found multiple connections to Robert De Niro and what we were predicting would be a very near future head wound. One of the examples, the one I'm citing here, is Machete. So in Machete, Robert De Niro is playing this Trump-like character, a xenophobic senator, and as he's
Mhm.
talking about he's talking about immigrants in a very negative way,
Mhm.
and then he gets shot. He gets shot, and then the sniper actually gets shot in the ear. So you have two elements here. You have the xenophobic speech, and then you have the shot in the ear.
The
Now, when
assassination attempt, yeah.
exactly, and when Trump was shot at, he was pointing at a sign, which is why his head was turned. And that sign talked about 20 million illegal immigrants and the damage they were doing to the country. So he was essentially almost verbatim just repeating what De Niro was saying in a movie from 14 years prior at the very second he was shot. And then you add on to it the
Mhm.
element of the bloody ear wound. So what I'm pointing out here is that the association of De Niro at the Trump rally recalls to people who've watched it these previous scenes that were then enacted on the world stage. And I tested this. I went to the video on YouTube of Machete, and you can find people saying, wow, this was Trump's point of view 30 minutes ago. Like people do have these deep associations with media they've consumed in the past, this
Mhm.
foreshadowing. And then it gets even deeper. That's just the surface level, but it goes deeper. But what I'm pointing out here is that it's the actors foreshadowing events where they are playing in fiction the roles of real people. So, for example, so De Niro in Machete was playing future Trump, and this
Mhm.
movie came out in 2010, and it's so specific, and there's so many layers to it that what we have determined is that this has to be calculated, that this is literature, that this is
Mhm.
a script, but it transcends any one movie, any one platform. So I coined the term metascript to define.
Metascript.
Yes, yeah. So if our conquerors are writing history, which they are, and there's a great play about this, a 30-minute theater play from 1968 called The Newsbenders. But if they're writing history, it is a script. And I call it the meta script. And the script, they must tell the story in broad strokes, what's going to happen over the next 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years. But then they have significant events that are planned all along. And by looking at it from this perspective, you can find suggestions of, for example, foreshadowing for 9/11 as far back as 1968. You can find examples of foreshadowing for 2020, for 9/11. I'm talking about 10, 20, 30 years. So
Mhm.
predictive programming is very well understood. The earliest example of Trump in predictive programming is from 1958, a show called Trackdown, which even predicted his arrest. Now, these are not coincidences. This isn't some supercomputer. This is a script, and they fulfill the script on the world stage. So they make history almost like they're doing a reality TV show. They're simulating events.
Hmm. And they use media as a, like you said, as a builder, as a it's like it builds up on their history, like on their events and everything. And I brought on Armin beforehand because he has perspective regarding, you know, chronology of history. And how far back do you think they had tools like media? Like, let's say back in the Renaissance or whatnot, they didn't have, news broadcasts, but they probably use some kind of tool to shape narratives, to control information even as early as back then and even beyond, right?
Oh, yes, yes. I recently started using the term history telling.
History
It's like
telling.
storytelling, but it's his story. And then who is he? He is Big Brother. And I
Mm.
think what we're looking at is this new iteration where they've merged all these previous worldviews into one worldview that everybody accepts. And it's
Mm.
based on science, the scientific paradigm. And that's fine. Science is fine. But there's a point where media and special effects replace real science and observations. And that's where we're questioning the model. But I think this goes back much further. I would posit that every religion
Hmm.
is, presents a worldview. Like you take any holy book, any book, and you read it, and it tells you, the story where we came from, where we're going, what's important. And if everybody accepts that, you have a sort of a harmony. And I think that this technique of creating harmony through synchronizing people under a uniform belief system is a science. It's basically how the power elite control the many. And I think the idea here is the belief, and this has been stated by, I think, Polybius. There's this commonly suggested idea that mankind is fickle, lawless, and that the mob needs to be regulated with superstition and pageantry. And I think today, we're all thinking that we're the most sophisticated we've ever been. We're above superstition. We're above the dark ages. We outgrew all that stuff. And I would say, no, actually the opposite's true. We're in a dark age in a very real sense, because we have accepted the existence of things that you could rightly consider superstitions. But these are superstitions that serve the interests of the state. I would contend that the modern flood myth, and you all know what I'm talking about. If I say it, they'll put a correction on your video. But that is a myth that gives the priesthood of this modern religion a moral high ground. And it allows them to tell you how to comport yourself and maybe tithe a little bit in order to stop Gaia from flooding the world. So there's social control. And then it divides society, believers, non-believers. And you'll notice to the left, scapegoats to the right for climate change. Well, why is that? To me, it's a form of social control, and it's using mythology. And interestingly, when you look into the iconography of these organizations, NASA, you have all the trappings of the older religious or older paradigms, specifically Noah, Noah's Ark. But then you have the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, which has a symbol of a bird, like a dove, just like Noah does from the Bible. And so what I'm saying is that even NASA and affiliated organizations appropriate Old Testament iconography and recreate the same old myths for the same old purposes. And I think go ahead.
So, yeah, what you said about we currently being in a dark age, I totally agree. If you just, whatever it is they give us, if you just take it at face value and look at the way people wrote and communicated with each other, even 100 years ago, they had better discernment than modern day populations. Like, people today are way dumbed down. I think there's more NPCs per capita than any other time in human history. So I just wanted to make that interjection.
I think it's a valid point. And I think when I say dark age, I'm talking about darkness as ignorance, and the ignorance is weaponized against the ignorant. The power elite actually create this. I think that there's this two-tiered system, and the printing press, if you recall, was obviously problematic. Everybody can get the text, and it's no longer filtered, and so it's something to overcome. Like literacy is one of the things that levels the playing field. And if you look at how illiteracy can be weaponized against populations, it can degrade them. It makes them exploitable. How is it different from today, where you could argue that the masses are visually illiterate, where it matters more? And when I say visually illiterate, I mean, and I'm guilty of this myself. I mean, I can't always tell real from fake when I see it on the screen. And you have to break the habit of assuming. I saw this giant clownfish the size of a whale. I thought it was real. I watched the penguin, and I thought, that's an interesting looking guy. Didn't know it was Colin Farrell in a mask. So if the majority of the lies that we're told are strictly coming through our eyeballs, there's no real filter. And I think that using the visual arts and media as they do today, I think they have effectively put us in a new dark age where we could be made to believe in the most absurd things. You see it all the time, but I think that dark age is appropriate, and it's only going to get darker as the censorship ramps up and as people become more metaverse oriented. And that's the objective here. Pull us out of the meatverse, put us into the metaverse.
Yeah, and keep us sucked in and in front of screens where they have more control of narrative shaping. And that's why they're increasing interactivity with the metaverse. They want us out of the meatverse.
Yeah, precisely. And I think that this is long-term social engineering, and we shouldn't underestimate it. I mean, we talked about on my live stream yesterday, I was talking about the upcoming fight between Tyson and Jake Paul. and the
Mhm.
significance of Netflix. So Netflix's first CEO and co-founder is the grand nephew of Edward Bernays, the
Oh,
father
wow.
of public relations. And so Edward Bernays, as most people know, created public relations and mastered the art of influencing humanity en masse, changing our behaviors, selling us on things that we might have rejected at any previous time. And he's also related to Sigmund Freud. So you just put those two together. Sigmund Freud, they know what's beneath the hood. You look at Edward Bernays, they can influence the mass mind. And then Netflix. And
Mm.
Netflix has been one of the most consistent sources of predictive programming and something else I call concurrent programming. It's not insignificant. And my point in bringing this up is that the power is the monolithic worldview shaping, where they can get everybody or most people to look at one thing all at once and
Mm.
synchronize us on this one thing. And last night was a good example of the power of the spectacle that they create.
Mm.
And I would say that the Netflix in general is proof of how engineered and how um, rigidly controlled our media is. It's not random. For example, you asked me for the example of predictive programming. More
Mhm.
importantly, are examples of concurrent. So, for example, Trump kicks off his campaign in Waco. The day before, Netflix released Waco, American Apocalypse.
Mm.
Then you had, for example, the HBO Game of Thrones, House of the Dragon comes out just as Roe v. Wade is overturned. And the opening episode has the queen dying in childbirth because it's all barbaric and they needed the male. And even though she's the most powerful woman in the kingdom, they need the male son. So she dies. And that's not a coincidence. And we have so many examples of real time alignment between news and the entertainment. Rebel Ridge, the entire story of Rebel Ridge, the first 15 minutes happened to Tyreek Hill the day after it came out. And people in the news will make these observations and they'll say, wow, what an eerie coincidence. But we look at eerie coincidences all day. And not only do we notice these, we predict them. We can look at
Mhm.
a movie and say, this is going to contain some kind of framework and a lot of narrative foreshadowing and other things that we can look forward to happening in the news. And this
And
is like, we often talk about.
and let me just interject and vouch for Tim here. I'm in his Discord, and they do as he just said. Like they have a lot of good pattern recognizers in there. I've never seen anything like it. So uh, the think tank concept, I'm seeing it realized in real time. So just wanted to add that point. And speaking of predictive programming, this segues really good into my next question. Um, what, in your opinion, how does Hollywood serve as a tool for societal control? We spoke about the media, now Hollywood.
Okay, and thanks for your comments about the think tank. I recognize your username, Bach Precision, from all of your
Yep,
comments, and
that's me.
this has always been a group of people contributing to the conversation, and it's been this way for years. So it's not just me; it's a big think tank, and everybody in the chat is included. And it does take a lot of people to unravel this thing because I don't play video games, and people who play video games give me information that's
Mm.
relevant. And so we do pool our information together, and the results have been pretty astounding. But now, so to get back to your question about Hollywood,
Yeah.
even before I started looking at fake news, I was studying like the occult, the New Age movement, and Kenneth Anger, very significant figure here. Kenneth Anger had wrote this book called Hollywood Babylon, and yeah, he was a Mickey Mouseketeer when he was young. He has
Okay.
some insights about him, but he was famous for being a Satanist and a film director. He worked with one of Charles Manson's killers. He worked with the singer of the Rolling Stones, Mick Jagger. Interesting individual all around. But in his book Hollywood Babylon, he had said that Hollywood would be where the pageantry for the religion of the New Age would be presented to the masses. And
Mm.
Babylon, in the occult religion that he was a part of, the Lima, is their name of the goddess that mankind would be worshiping. And it's not insignificant here. that Margot Robbie was in the movie based on this, Babylon, and then she plays Barbie. Because when you get the symbolism here, and that's where we get into the deeper aspects of it, the esoteric, you can actually discern a clear, what you would consider to be a religious paradigm that is beneath, it's in the subtext of all of the media presentations, and that we have been collectively, as a collective, humanity has already been brought into a one world religion. And I jokingly call it NASAtology, but it truly is the case that NASA is a mystery school, and it's called syncretism, where they take the older paradigm, the older religious symbols, and then they adapt it to the new. And so it's sort of a syncretic blend of mystery Babylon and science fiction, and not all that different from Scientology. In fact, there's a lot connected there.
Saved by Truth is asking, did Jay Dyer rip off that book for his book Esoteric Hollywood?
I don't know, but he may have cited it. I'll have to check. I mean, a lot of people have noticed these connections, and I think we can start synthesizing a lot of this information. And quite literally, though, to answer the question, Hollywood and movies have been the major worldview shaper. It has replaced the holy books, the screen.
100%.
And Stanley Kubrick's 2001 Space Odyssey has all kinds of clues about this. The monolith represents the one world religion, the one world, I guess you would call it our shared worldview, our consensus. And it's like a new monotheism. And I would even argue that our smartphones, that the black screen is another representative of this. It's about our uniformity. And they have been putting us all into the same box. Doesn't matter what your subjective beliefs are, all these different religions, as long as everybody accepts the new one that is like the umbrella. And 2020 demonstrated that the new religion of, NASAtology, but also the scientism dominated everything else. And the new concept of sin that even atheists would accept had been unleashed. And they use that and their injectable salvation to divide society into the saved by the state church and its priests and those who protest it. And that was a purposeful division as well. So we have a new paradigm. It's a new religion. It's a new design based on something much older. But Hollywood has been instrumental in this. On and off the screen, these actors are advancing it.
You're going to find this funny, but I used to always, I never understood how Americans are so good at, just regurgitating lines from movies, and they all have their best, every American I know is an advanced movie buff. But then when I got into, seeking out the truth and whatnot, I realized that, exactly like you said, movies are the new scripture for this for this religious peddling that they're doing in the modern world. Like, if you're not a movie buff, you're missing out, basically. So I used to be, scoffing at the fact that Americans get a lot of their information from Hollywood, but now I realize, because they do, if you want to fight fire with fire, you go seek out Americans, because there's nobody in our neck of the woods who could reverse engineer a movie from its foundational aspect. People in the Middle East, they just take it at face value. Oh, this is Hollywood. It's exactly how it is in America. The way the movies are is the way real life over there is as well. Speak about people who haven't traveled back and forth. So I just wanted to make that point. But I have more questions, Tim. And anyone in the chat who has any questions, you're more than welcome. Okay, so Tim, do you think we are living in a Truman Show type scenario? And if so, who do you think is directing the script?
Absolutely. I'd say literally, yes, we are. And it's interesting you asked that, because the first time I noticed that there was something else going on in Hollywood was the Truman Show. I happened to be reading a book by Robert Anton Wilson called The Cosmic Trigger about Sirius, the dog star,
Hmm.
and its significance in the mystery schools. And the book is about the author's experience with this number 23. And it's a really interesting book, but I'm reading this book and I go see The Truman Show. And here's this guy who's living in a dream world. He's believing all the lies, so he's following the script. He's like an NPC until one day one of the stage lights falls, and it's the stage light that corresponds to the star Sirius, and it says Canis Majoris. And when I saw that, I started looking deeper, and I realized, okay, this is the story of the fool waking up. This is the
Hmm.
story of somebody essentially seeing through the Matrix, which is another movie that came out around the same time. But I realized, okay, there's a level of esoteric info here that the average ticket buyer wouldn't know. So at first I thought these could be Easter eggs. Maybe it's just for movie geeks. But it was just way too tied to some very specific lines of thought. And then I followed Jim Carrey on his other movie, The Number 23. And The Number 23, the book called The Number 23, is based on The Cosmic Trigger, the book that I brought to the Truman Show.
Hmm.
And it's more of the same. It's the same set of concepts and teachings stemming from the Egyptian mystery schools. And I thought, okay, there's got to be some reason why there's this esoteric aspect going on with these movies that is obviously not aimed at the mainstream consumers. So I started looking deeper as a result of these what I first thought were just Easter eggs. But to get back to it, yeah, the Truman Show is in your face. It's how it really is. That we
Hmm.
do have some kind of well, but the thing is, it's not like it's a physical prison or a physical geographical area, but the Truman Show is in your head, is what I'm saying. That
Yeah, the
if you
perceptions they. Sorry, go continue. Sorry.
Well, I mean, like Christoph said, he said that we accept the world that we're presented with, and the
Mm,
world we're presented with doesn't necessarily correspond to the one outside. And so, as long as you go along with the script, the show, their script, you're essentially living in their Truman Show matrix. And what does that mean? Well, it's hard to see it from the inside because you have to look at the totality of all the BS you've accepted and how it actually does shape your day to day thinking. And that's kind of why I think it's important to make this distinction between the off-world stage perspective and Trutherville. So,
mm,
for example, people who see through fake news or think the news is lying, they go into conspiracy conjecture. Well, they often walk away believing a lot more stuff that they can't verify, and it's worse. Now they're afraid of 5G towers. That's not progress. That's in the direction of deeper levels of mind control. So I think
mm,
ultimately, yeah, we're in a Truman Show until you consciously reject the programming and consciously um, recognize the lies and cease believing in them. And that is not easy to do because of course, peer pressure and the echo chamber.
yeah, you will be ridiculed by the masses at first. If you even attempt to uh, describe what we're talking about to the average person, they will find it uh, uh, too fantastical to consider face value. So you might be ridiculed at first, but uh, that shouldn't stop you, in my opinion.
Right,
Okay.
right. Someone mentioned Plato's cave, and yeah,
All right.
that's
Yeah.
long observed that the people who go outside the box are ridiculed. But one thing that I think that separates us from Trutherville and mainstream conspiracy theorists is that they've been targeted and tarnished by the media as paranoid, as crazy. And
Tinfoil hat wearers. Yeah.
and what I'd like to point out though is that what we're bringing forth here is informed disbelief. So we tend to know more about what the believers believe is true, even if we don't believe in it. And so, informed disbelief is actually, I would say, it's a better position than low information believers who barely even study the news that they just passively accept as real. So I think we're at a point where media skeptics, especially today, given how visually illiterate we have been rendered, I think especially today we can start claiming the intellectual high ground over the passive news consumers.
Hmm. Okay. So I know now that you don't believe in simulation theory when it comes to reality. But what's your take on it? I've been hearing different um, positions and theories and definitions of simulation theory. I like you because you're very good at uh, expressing out concepts. Like your vocabulary is, you know, bar none, very good. So you're the go-to guy, I guess. Simulation theory. What is that?
Okay, well, and thank you for saying that. My last book, Autohoaxology 101, I'm making the point here that we actually do have a philosophical framework and a methodology for consuming media in an active way. And I would say that the mainstream and alternative both consume it passively, where they're not questioning the primary presentation. So there's a fundamental difference. And so I think that we need to be very precise in our definitions. Like this is
Mhm.
key because they lose you with words. They use words like spells. They confuse us. But and so I'm trying to eliminate confusion and and also fine tune our arguments. Let's just get rid of any logical fallacies. Let's just focus on knowing, not believing. So and these are critical distinctions. But so to get back to what you were just asking, what was it you had said?
Oh, about simulation theory.
Oh, a simulation. That's here. Okay, this is it. Okay, so
Yeah.
simulation theory. First of all, I am open to the idea that we are spiritual beings having physical experiences. I'm not a believer that we're all just evolved apes with big egos. I think there's more to the picture here. So I don't reject this idea of the non-corporeal and transcendent. But when it comes to simulation theory, I happen to think that it's been artificially introduced into the conspiracy theorist realm. So anybody seeing eerie coincidences on the news and anybody noticing predictive programming will be led to the erroneous conclusion that what they're seeing must be the result of
Mhm.
a higher power, which means the fake news has now been mystified and they no longer are interpreting it properly. And so for a long time, predictive programming has been mistakenly assumed to have been the result of a higher power, some kind of demiurge, or that it's something that, whatever the case, man couldn't be behind it. And I
Mhm.
say we have to reject that. We have to reject that premise that man couldn't possibly do it because it's hiding the nature of this thing. So I think that the simulation theory, which supports the idea that something beyond man is engineering our news events, simulation theory has been used to hide the mental simulations, like the simulated events. You do a simulated terror attack, you put it on the news as real, well, people have accepted that simulation. And I think
Mhm.
that the more simulations that you accept, the more lies that frame your worldview, the more you could be said to exist within a simulation. And that's why I say we live in a simulation, but the physical world is as tangible as could be.
Mhm. I'm just showing the audience your book, Auto Hoaxology 101. You can find it on Amazon. Okay, so moving on, what do you think about the phenomena known as Mandela effects? And do you think it's just glitches in this matrix, or is it a psyop, or something else entirely?
Yeah, very good question. And I had not looked into it too closely,
Same.
and I thought, this might be some variant of synchronicity. There might be something to it. So I didn't have any reason to not believe in it. But then I looked into it a little closer, and I started to think about what it means, and I started to consider something here. I started to think, well, this could be a discrediting thing to say that, hey, this person is saying that the news is fake, but he also says that reality shifts every day. So now suddenly the person who sees through the fake news says reality's fake. And if reality's fake, what does fake news matter? So I thought it might be some kind of a misinformation or a distraction line. But
Mm,
I looked into it closer into what could be the real cause of it. And what I concluded is that it's nothing more than a trick. It's actually a form of the misinformation effect, but it's caused by what you would call interrogator bias and retroactive interference. And there's a phenomenon that's well understood by detectives when they interrogate people,
mm,
where people can falsely remember things based on how the question is framed. The framing of a question can interfere with something. And so, for example, with the Mandela effects, if somebody says, "Do you remember the Ford logo with a swirl or without a swirl?" Well, now you have two images in your mind, and you're conflating the two because now they're both equally real, and your actual memory can be replaced by the more recent one. And so now it's just a question of, are you going to go with what the interrogator is suggesting? And chances are, if you're already a conspiracy theorist and you're already afraid of CERN, or you already like the idea, you might be inclined to say, okay, I remember it with a swirl. And then your memory might actually back that up. So they actually insert false memories. This is also called the misinformation effect. It's just well understood. And so, in other words, it's a trick. And if it wasn't a trick, it wouldn't be a binary. It wouldn't be just Jif or Jiffy. There'd be 50 variations of the peanut butter brand. But it's all about how you ask the question. Nobody ever says, hey, did you notice anything different about any logos today? Because you wouldn't get any answers. But if somebody says, do you remember the logo like this or this? They put you into a binary, and then
Yeah.
they're interfering with your recollection. So the Mandela effect, I think, is a psyop, and I think it was put out there to discredit anybody seeing through the media simulation.
Well said. Yeah, the power of suggestion is the needed ingredient for it to work. Because if you don't ask the questions in that way, you won't get the answers you want for people to say, okay, you're right. It did say Bernstein. And another proof of that is there isn't equivalence in other languages. There's no Mandela effects in Arabic because they never bothered. They have their own other psyops they're working with in other countries. So it was a specific psyop, and I think for the English speaking world.
Well, it was a great exercise for me to unravel the various fallacies that go into it. For example, they'll say everybody remembers Timmy fell down the well. Well, that can't be true. That's generalizing. Everybody remembers. But then if you ask them, how did they get Timmy out of the well? They have no answer. And that's because these aren't real memories. These are memorized memes, but there's no actual memory of Timmy coming out of the well. But I went through Mandela effect by Mandela effect, and I realized, okay, they're falling for a trick. And the reason why you would want to know this, the reason why you would want to debunk it is you want to know what you're vulnerable to. Because the mainstream media uses the misinformation effect. It uses Mandela effects as a standard operating procedure, the way it frames your reality, the way it influences your recollections, even with made for TV versions of fake news events. So I think that the Mandela effect is actually cognitive sabotage, and it should be understood because it is part of how the media works.
Cognitive sabotage. That's a good way to put it.
Well, how
Okay.
discrediting is it? I'm like, nobody died at fill in the blank. And then they say, well, you also believe that reality could shift. Maybe tomorrow 3,000 people died. So we have to remain rooted in objective reality. We have to be objectivists with regard to media, and there aren't any. And I think that by maintaining that standard, we'll get to the truth. So that's my take on the Mandela effect.
Okay, Tim. So now we're going to go into more of the cosmology and conspiracy subject matter. So, what do you think flat Earth theory? Why do you think it resonates with so many people? I think you've answered a little bit earlier. And what do you say to that? What does that say about trust in mainstream science in 2024, 2025?
Yeah, it really says everything, doesn't it? And I think this is why the flat Earth, unlike you can talk about Bigfoot, chupacabra, alien abductions, it doesn't challenge the dominant paradigm. Mandela effect is the most popular conspiracy theory, one of them, because it doesn't challenge anything. The flat Earth actually says this agency is lying, and everybody globally is lying. And I think that it also is challenging establishment science in a way that they don't want to occur. They want you to be talking about space aliens because it reinforces the dominant worldview. So I think the flat Earth question was attractive or the concept, because if you can't trust them about the moon landing, if they're constantly faking stuff, then why not make them prove it? And I thought it was a great movement in a sense that it did cause a lot of blowback and pushback. And to date, they haven't provided anything better as far as evidence. So
Mhm.
when it comes down to the shape of the world, to me, it doesn't matter at this point. They could go down to Antarctica next month and find a 24-hour sun. But at the end of it, the images we have been shown from space are all fake. And I say all, I mean, literally, we can prove this.
All
And that means,
photoshopped, yeah.
so what does it mean? Well, maybe they're hiding continents on the globe. You know, there could be all kinds of reasons for the fakery. Maybe there's something at the North Pole they don't want us to see. So my point of it is, we have been given a false worldview that all of the nations on the earth agree upon. So
Mm.
when they say, as some conspiracy theorists will say, we faked the moon landing to trick the Russians. It was a propaganda war or a propaganda victory. I would say no. They faked the moon landing to trick mankind, and that there is no distinction between countries at the level of one world government.
Mm. So when it came to the space race, they were all in on it. I'm sure you're familiar with this guy Bart Sibrel.
Yes,
He
yes.
says the Chinese were threatening to go full disclosure mode, but they've been bribed with tech. I think he's part of the script because what made him viral was getting punched by what's his name, the astronaut. Like I don't trust Bart Sibrel, but and his narrative because he's
Yeah,
a Hollywood guy and or try to be a guy in Hollywood and
I think you're right. I think you're right about that. See, Bart Sibrel, a funny thing happened on the way to the moon.
that's
What
it.
I
Yeah.
call him a guardrailer, which means
Mhm.
they know a lot of people are going to see through the moon landing. And so what they want to do is they want to get ahead of it. So he
Mhm.
goes out there to say they couldn't go because of Van Allen radiation belt, but he doesn't say space is fake. He doesn't say the space shuttle's fake. He doesn't say the space station's fake. But instead, he says that we have a secret space program. So that's a
Mhm.
guardrail where instead of seeing that everything's fake, they say, well, this thing was fake, but everything else is real. So he's damage control, in other words.
Okay. Yeah, that's the impression I get from him, and just within the same theme, like space exploration and what's the ultimate agenda for NASA?
Okay, good question. And I think we could also include SpaceX and Musk in this and the whole Mars project.
Thank
Um,
you.
Based on my research, I happen to think that we're entering into, or we are in, the aeon of Mars. That the new age is going to have a certain character. It's going to be Martian. And it doesn't mean we're going to Mars, but they're going to make Earth Mars in the sense that they have an ideal society that they've conceptualized. You can look up space communism. The Russians had this idea. There's this book called Red Star from 1909, where these early rocket scientists in Russia had conceptualized building a perfect communist society on Mars. The book's called Red Star, and then export it back to Earth when we've seen how good it is. So I think ultimately the Aeon of Mars is about this new global paradigm built on environmentalism and sustainability. But the way
Mhm.
they're going to get us there is they're going to sell us on the ideal. And that's what the space program is for. Not for taking us to a distant paradise, but it's for programming the space between our ears, our worldview. And they want us to accept that the worldview that is man as a multiplanetary species is the one for us. That is our future.
Hmm. And the extraterrestrials just part of the you know like more fodder for this agenda part of or there's something else do you think behind the alien narrative
You
like
know, that's a great question because it actually relates to these Russian rocket scientists. Where I was researching this red star and a lot of these early characters, and they talked about something called Russian cosmism, the idea of outer space as like the universe is just intrinsically intelligent, and space is like this new replacement for heaven. And they had even talked about replacing a lot of religious concepts with a more scientific version. And I would contend that aliens are just a reinvention of angels.
angels, yeah.
And these are angels that atheists will believe in.
Yeah, yeah, I've heard you make that connection, and it makes sense because heavenly beings, but they need it in a modern, all these guys, they build advanced spacecraft, but it's the same role.
Yeah, and it's also interesting how that the atheists will believe that the aliens are saviors, but then the far right tendency now is to see aliens as demons. And
Hmm.
that's not coincidental because the far right also demonizes science, and meteorologists are causing hurricanes. And so these are all intentionally injected hyperstitions meant to divide society, but it's certainly built upon an older framework. And I think aliens and angry gods and flood myths, I think these are all things that are already built into our cultural narratives, and it's really easy to syncretize it all, which is what has been accomplished through modern mass media.
Hmm. Okay. Okay, so we're going to move on to more of an esoteric line of questions now, Tim. So, what do you think is the role occult symbolism plays in shaping our perception of reality?
So that's an interesting question because it's there. We can't
Hmm.
deny it, and we'd be remiss if we only focused on the political ramifications of predictive programming. But
Hmm.
the last two Super Bowls contain very obvious what you call Templar symbolism or thelemic symbolism, and the next one will too. It's predictable. So,
Hmm.
what is actually going on here? Well, I make the case that modern media is the state church globally. And just like all churches have their exoteric and their esoteric, I think the same is true with media. And I think
Hmm.
that this modern world view we all share is not just templated on something older, but it's a continuation of something older. And I do think there's a place where you could argue that media and magic intersect. And
Hmm.
magic is it's a complicated topic. There's the sleight of hand, there's the sleight of mind, mental manipulation. And then there's this other aspect, which seems to account for a belief that our attention, our conscious willed intentions, have some kind of tangible effect on the world as we experience it. I mean, magic is about manipulating reality with the mind.
Hmm.
And if you look at any of the magical philosophies, and I have a number of sources on this, you could make the argument, even just looking at the iconography and symbolism, that the television set is essentially the screen is like a scrying mirror. It's basically an altar, but in a sense, we are all being collectively synchronized into some kind of collective group ritual, and it spikes at different points. Even before I looked into fake news, I was looking at the interesting correlation between Candlemas and the Super Bowls and the ceremony or the event where Janet Jackson had a wardrobe malfunction and she was bare breasted for a moment
Hmm.
and she had a sun piercing on her nipple. Well, uh, that was clearly an allusion to Bridget, the goddess, and the weaning of the sun god, which is what they celebrate in bulk that day. That Super Bowl Sunday, in bulk means in milk. So it's a weaning ceremony, and the sun god is represented by Justin Timberlake. So these pagan ceremonies are being performed all the time. So we
Hmm.
can't say it's not a factor. So then the question is, well, what is it doing? What does it mean when you have billions of minds entrained to occult symbolism and sigils and these rites? And so I start digging into sigil magic, and the premise behind it is that we have latent co-creative capabilities, but there's some kind of block that you can't
Hmm.
just will things to change. However, the object of magic is to remove that block and temporarily access your higher powers. That's the idea behind these various occult philosophies. And one of the ideas behind sigil magic is that they take a sentence or an intent, and they disguise it into a symbol that's not intelligible, that you can't even read, but that your subconscious will still process it as though it can unpack it. And
Hmm.
that by bypassing your psychic sensor, you're somehow able to tap into your subconscious mind and whatever influence it can exert. So from that perspective, you might argue that we are all being tapped into as matrix batteries in some kind of massive mega occult ritual, pretty much at all times.
I'm just gonna tie what we were. I'm just gonna tie in what we were just talking about with a historical incident. Uh, Saudi Arabia. is basically an absolute monarchy, right? They've had only one of their kings in the modern era assassinated, and this was King Faisal. This was the king who was responsible for the oil. What do they call that? The boycott, which made the price of oil rise, significantly in the 70s. A lot of people don't know the reason why he was assassinated. It was because he brought broadcasting television to Saudi Arabia. And when he did that, massive protests by the local Saudis happened, and there was this one renegade Amir Prince who was related to him, who was moved by these protests, and apparently he was the one who pulled the trigger in a family function or something like that. And I always wondered, is this a subconscious rebellion to what you were just talking about? Because 100 years ago, I remember reading about when European explorers came into the Middle East. The first time the local Bedouins saw the camera and photography, they were so frightened about it. They would refuse being photographed, and they would say that this thing is stealing our soul, or they had superstitions like that. So I was wondering, like, is that like almost instinctive rebellion against the programming?
I think you might be onto something. I really do. Because look at how many people instinctively, intuitively sense this is all BS, even if they don't know why. When it
Yeah.
comes to fake events, there's like, and it's very prevalent. You see a lot of people who are quick to call things fake, and it's not that they're like they're skeptical in a really focused way,
Mm,
but that there's this sense of distrust. But I think there might be something to what you were just suggesting. It made me think about these protests in Iran where
mm,
they burn obelisks. They would create these obelisks and they would burn them. Sometimes they look like the Washington Monument with like dollar signs on them. But the burning of obelisks was like a ceremonial rejection of Baal, the earth god. And interestingly, then after that, Iran had acquired their own space program. And my
oh,
contention is that the rocket is just a new iteration of the obelisk. And this is all Baal worship. It's all the same ancient paradigm. So, in other words, they may have been rejecting the symbols, but it actually sneaked up on them under the guise of science. And this new obelisk can actually physically take you into the heavens. But this is just an example of how all of the different various religions are actually underneath the umbrella of this new meta religion that everybody has been absorbed into.
and Tim, what do you think is Musk's role in this religious aspect, modern religion? Like, I hate that guy so much. He's such a phony in my view.
Yeah, I think it's accurate to say he's phony. I think he's an amalgamation of, I would argue, based on his characteristics as he's been presented to us, of Werner von Braun, Jack Parsons, Willy Wonka, Tony Stark, Iron Man, and Emperor Constantine. And these are all
Wow.
aspects of his character. And do you remember when he bought Twitter, he put the big X up and it was glowing? And this was
Mhm.
during the dog days of summer. He put a slogan, Blaze Your Star. All this stuff is significant. And the bird and the cross, which are actually, older Christian symbols, but the Twitter bird's replaced by the cross and it's glowing. And
Right.
it reminded me of something. A few years before, when he was at South by Southwest, he said we need to become multiplanetary. That is a quote. He quoted a Russian rocket scientist named Konstantin,
Mhm.
spelled with a K. And that's an interesting connection there. But the Emperor Constantine had a vision of a glowing cross, the cross of light. And so Musk creates this cross of light. And I have been suggesting for some time that this new dark age represents a new type of feudalism, and that Musk's role on the world stage would be part of the consolidation of all media, like our new Bible, the new
Right.
the new worldview that's accepted and that's authoritative. And I suggested years ago that he was reprising the role of Constantine. That was one of his aspects. So Emperor Constantine, and
Right.
that we're moving into Mars feudalism. this Martian idea, space communism, where people who live these lavish lifestyles, freedom, consumers, are accepting as an ideal the ascetic lifestyle on Mars, where you're all wearing the same uniform and you're just basically farmers. It's like an
Mhm.
agrarian revolution, and there's not going to be any AR-15s on Mars. It's going to just be, it's a complete drastic change from civilization as we live it. But it's a new ideal that they've been selling us, and Musk is instrumental in it. And I think his role with X is part of the destruction of free speech, justifying the destruction of a lot of our internet communications, our platforms. So, in other words, I think that Elon Musk and X is meant to kind of, in a way, do the same thing. What he's doing in his totality is justifying the shrinking of our universe of ideas, this censorship, and it also ties into the fact that he's with the space program, because the space program has always been about worldview. So who has more power over worldview than somebody who owns a social media platform like Twitter? So he's not like a rogue. He's not
Mhm.
separate. He's part of the infrastructure of mass mind control. He's part of the capstone level controllers. It's wild to me that people think that he's somehow fighting for
A
free speech.
renegade.
Yeah, no, that's absurd. But when you look into the various aspects of Musk, he's an entirely contrived character, and he has a very defined role.
Mm. So, what do you think? Um, like, can you share an example of symbolism in recent events that most people might overlook?
Yeah, let's go ahead and reference one, because the Super Bowl, it was announced the
Yes.
next Super Bowl halftime show. It's going to be performed by Kendrick Lamar. He's going to be the main star.
Hmm.
So Kendrick Lamar, and this is an example of the pagan rituals in plain sight. So go back to the Super Bowl halftime show where Rihanna is dressed in red, and she has her moon bump. She's pregnant. She's this goddess representative, but she's scarlet red. And to the occult religion that runs this place, their worship of the Babylon, they call her the Scarlet Witch or the Scarlet Woman. That color is highly significant. So she comes down as the avatar of the goddess, and all of the dancers are men in white.
Hmm.
So the men in white, the goddess in red. And this is part of the symbolism built into this system, where the god, the male aspect, is represented by white, and in their rituals they use the bread and then the wine, red, for the goddess. So that was that Super Bowl. Then the following one, Alicia Keys performs, and she's dressed head to toe in red. And Usher comes up, and he's wearing all white, and he's got a phoenix, which is another Christ symbol, on his shirt. So the male, the Christ representative, in white, and the female, the goddess representative, in red. And then we have Kendrick Lamar, who the year before got an award for a video performance called Heart Part 5, where he's dressed in white with a crown of thorns. And then he's surrounded by female dancers, all in red, who smear him in blood.
Hmm.
So you have the Christ Magdalene, the beast Babylon, the Isis Osiris pairing in both of the Super Bowl performances. And now the upcoming performance is starring a guy who's already performed this thing at one of these award shows. And so this is a occult symbolism in plain sight. And I can point to many examples of it, but it perfectly comports with their religious ceremonies. And so these Super Bowl halftime shows actually do match well, well understood and practiced, what you would consider to be witches' sabbats. These are ceremonies.
Ceremonies, yeah, ritualistic. Uh, uh, in Arabic, it would be called ibadah because when Muslims pray and they're touching their forehead on the ground, that's a ritual as well, and it's called ibadah. Okay, so we have a few more questions, and then we'll go and see what questions the chat may have. Uh, how do secret societies and ancient mysteries connect to modern day events or control structures, in your opinion?
Okay, I think that it's a continuation of the same, and that the
Mhm.
torture. So that whoever runs this system didn't build it. And I think you can find a lot of answers by looking into their symbolism. Like, for example, the back of our dollar bill, you have the pyramid and the 1776 at the bottom, and then the eye and the capstone on top, where it's the capstone. The pyramid's not complete. The capstone is descending. And so 1776 AD is one clue here, because that's when America was born. But in the Masonic calendar, the year is 5,776 when America was founded, because you add 4,000. Now, the significance here is that 5,776 is the height in inches of the Great Pyramid. So now we've established a connection between the Great Pyramid, reference to the Egyptian mystery schools, the founding of America, and these are like really solid connections. And then if you go back to 1776 on the Masonic calendar, Anno Lucius AL, that is the year associated, 120 years after the flood, with the building of the Tower of Babel. So 1776 is both the start of the building of the Tower of Babel, the founding of America, and then it connects, of course, to that pyramid. And then go back or look at the One World Trade Tower, which is 1,776 feet high. So you look at One World Tower, that number again. And if you look at it from up close, it actually looks like, and this is built into the architecture, it looks like a pyramid with a capstone on it. So what we're looking at here is a continuity in symbolism, in their guiding mythologies, and it is certainly something that, to me, it part of the mystery school symbolism. One of their like recurring themes is that it's underground, that it's in the caves, the passing a torch. A torch is a significant symbol here. They are the light in the dark, and they're kind of monopolizing it. And so I look at the money, the dollar bill, and to me that represents the one world system that we're in, and that that represents you could say the new monotheism, the one agreed upon simulation that we all live in, according to Big Brother's viewfinder.
Oh, okay. By the way, guys, I accept super chats, super thanks. Marcel gifted a bunch of listeners memberships, so we have a membership section. Join. We have tons of content behind the vault. I've been making videos for years now. There's more questions, Tim. Speaking about your audience, right? They're very highly engaged. So, how do you think platforms like Infinite Plane Radio create a unique space for dialogue?
From the very beginning, we jumped into the flat Earth topic when it was very contentious, and we couldn't have a calm chat without disruptors and trolls. So I started the policy of handing out moderator status to everybody, which means everyone has a blue wrench. And so the blue wrench became a symbol of the IPS. So the penguin with the blue wrench, well, the blue wrench was symbolizing the fact that we wouldn't even have intelligent conversations if we didn't set some standards and maintain some sense of decorum, meaning excluding people who aren't serious. And so I think that we carried on that tradition as being part of the IPS culture, that we have kind of a no BS policy. It's not an echo chamber. However, we do have certain standards here because we all have an interest in what we're studying, and the results speak for themselves. We're very results driven. So there's really no drama in the think tank. It's just a lot of people looking and commenting and building on what we find.
Yeah, strictly a think tank type environment, and that's why I like it.
Yeah. When I started the channel, people used to send me blue wrenches. When I have a collection of painted blue wrenches that mostly, listeners have sent me, and I have one in my truck.
Okay, so what was one of the most surprising or thought-provoking questions from memory or theory you received from your audience?
Okay, now that's an interesting one, because I often there are things I wouldn't have found that really move things forward. Like, for example, Synchromorpheus had noticed this connection between a movie called Get Out and this subway killing of Jordan Neely by Daniel Penny. And what he unveiled, and it's still, there's always more coming out, but what he revealed here and what I put together on my end was that the alternative media was preparing us for this psyop by shouting certain ideas and certain slogans. And one of their slogans was get out of the cities. And it was a reference to the movie Get Out, which foreshadowed what happened on the subway. And so what I find is that there are people who put connections together that enable us to identify even the specific directors who we could point at and say, this director is most likely the author of this particular psyop. But I don't know if that answers your question, but what I'm saying is that I'm always given new perspectives, and these are things I would not have found if it weren't for other people.
Okay, so we're almost at the end of my set of questions. Chad are more than welcome to ask away. We'll also pull up a few questions I've already asked. So you talked about how you deal with trolls. How do you deal with skeptics and those who dismiss your ideas outright?
I rightfully inform them that they're not skeptics. That to be a skeptic of media is to also include all of the other information that they exclude, because it's a very, you could say it's that every media has a sort of a bias that it's going to reinforce its own beliefs. And so you have to really, to call yourself a skeptic, you have to be honest about what media really is. And if you're not including in your perspective propaganda, then you're not really fully informed enough to be a skeptic. And the skeptics are like pretty much saying the guys over there are wrong. The conspiracy theorists think they're skeptics of the mainstream. The mainstream thinks that they are skeptical of the conspiracy theorists. And I'm saying neither are skeptics, because both of them are accepting the mainstream mediation at face value and then having their own interpretations thereof. So I would say, no, if you're not aware of psyops and crisis actors, perception management, and predictive programming and how it functions, then you're not rightfully a skeptic. You're not informed enough.
Okay. Someone in the chat, Lucid Streams, is asking, and you've kind of covered the, no, you did cover this in your latest stream. Onion buying in an auction the InfoWars, Alex Jones InfoWars, everything. What's your take on that?
Okay, they and I was reading some tweets on this recently. They say they're going to take InfoWars and turn it into a joke site. And I looked into it, and one of the CEOs there had said that their objective, now that Alex Jones is done, is to go after podcasters and try to ridicule. So that's something to look forward to. They have an agenda here. And I think that that was sort of an implied threat that now they're going to go after the podcast sphere. And that's why it's all the more important for those of us who are looking at this from a truly skeptical position, network, as we do here, and build up an audience of informed listeners, informed media critics, so that we're outside of their censorship zones.
Keep the questions coming, guys. I'm just scrolling up, seeing if there's any questions we missed. Okay, so 1900 Shed Dog, he has this interesting question. He says, can you ask Timothy why he dismisses the premise of synchromysticism, but is very open to the idea of synchronicity? Synchromysticism would be synchronicity on a collective level.
Yeah, that's the fundamental misunderstanding. Synchromysticism is erroneously interpreting predictive programming as something arising from a cause other than man, as synchronicity. You cannot ascribe synchronicity to an action from another person. It's a personally experienced alignment of events and thoughts at a certain time and place. But synchromysticism is just the wrong explanation for, hey, this event in the news happened in the movie. No, that's not a synchronicity in the sense of the Jungian synchronicities. In fact, it's just a giveaway that you're looking at propaganda.
Any more questions, guys? Lucid is asking, what's on your mind currently? Any plans? Let me just.
Sure. Right now, the objective here is to um, get all these delayed projects off my table, just get everything moving. I have this tabloid that's just a click of a button away from being produced and distributed. The IPS Insider. I think putting a lot of our best ideas into print is a really good idea, and I'm
Mhm.
going to make that a monthly publication. So right now, my focus is working on the publication, even though it's delayed and it's taken a little bit more time. It is going to manifest before the end of this year. So that's pretty much where my focus has been.
And it was what, now about 2 weeks ago, you held this conference. It was very interesting. It's in your YouTube channel. Armin made a presentation. We had Armin on. Uh, go check out that conference. Do you have similar themed events planned for the future?
Yeah, the early idea was let's do a conference, but we don't have the numbers right now to
Mhm.
really justify a conference. So I thought let's just do maybe smaller events, just Zoom conferences. So I call it Auto Hoax Con, where I bring on people who are analyzing media from this perspective, but who have their own interpretations and takes on things. And so I got Reverse History and Armin Ree on the first one, and the second one, much of the same, and we expanded on what we were talking about. The next one will be on the 30th. And the objective, though, is to get enough people involved in these monthly conferences that we can eventually justify a convention. And a convention, not on conspiracy theories, the mundane stuff, chemtrails, and that nonsense, but I'm talking about a convention solely dedicated to the off-world stage perspective, solely dedicated to the fake until proven real school of thought. And that will be happening. It'll be an in-person event sooner or later.
Mm. Someone asked, any thoughts from you on coming events for 2025? That would be an interesting one.
Yeah, I think the ISS has to come down. There's a lot of
Mhm.
predictive programming in the movies. I talk about the movie ISS, and just the other day, they said that there's a hatch closed between America and Russia now. Well, the movie ISS is about Russia and America fighting in the space station. And the reason why they did that is they say that the Russian side has a leak and it could result in catastrophic failure. And then we have the story of the stranded astronauts and Boeing. And Boeing has been predicted through predictive programming, leave the world behind and fly me to the moon to have some kind of involvement in some future disaster. And so there's that as well. So I'm looking at the ISS as potentially the next major 9/11 like event, which would comport with all of the predictive programming.
Maybe like a space Chernobyl type thing.
Well, look, that movie Francis Ford Coppola just put out, Megalopolis, it has a Russian satellite that hits New York. And
Oh,
when that movie was going through the film festivals, a Russian satellite exploded in space, according to the news, and the astronauts on the ISS had to duck and cover. So that shows you the concurrent programming where a satellite explodes, a movie about a satellite exploding, and it causes a 9/11ing of New York. And it's like this nuclear satellite, some kind of thing from Russia. So again, I'm looking at the big picture, and that's what I say. It's monolithic. When you look at the news, and you're not a skeptic if you're not including all of the propaganda that went into the news. So you have to look at Netflix and the news as though there is no significant difference.
okay. All right. So, Tim, two more questions, and I think we'll be done. If society continues on its current trajectory, where do you see humanity in 50 years?
Uh, right now, we're in Brave New World. I
Yes.
mean, this is such a massive deception, and we laugh about it, we joke about it. It's easy to minimize it, but it's really, when you look at the big picture, it's incredible. This is the Tower of Babel. I think that we're going deeper, and it's not like, this is their peace. War is peace. 1984, the mind war is peace. They're conquering us through our mental model, the simulation. And I see the simulation becoming more entrenched. People are born into it. And as they come up with more excuses for us to lock down, specifically Fallout, People will become more metaverse dominant. And I think that's the trend going into the future. And outside of media skeptics, there is no alternative. There are only the programmers and the programmed. So I think and I don't want this to sound megalomaniacal, but I do think we represent something of a neo enlightenment alternative to the deepening of the dark age. And I don't think it's going to be platformed anywhere. So we are it.
Yeah. So if you are one of the, this has actually been one of my larger audiences, but still, we are like, speaking myself, a very small channel. Consider yourself fortunate, especially if you haven't heard someone like Tim before. I'm telling you, when I came up across the IPS community, it was a mind opener, and I hope if if there's such a thing as a mind virus, I hope we infect people with this virus.
Yeah, I call
So,
this mind war inoculation.
mind war inoculation. That's a good way to put it. Okay, what's the ultimate goal of Infinite Plane Radio, and what legacy do you hope to leave, Tim? It's the final
Uh,
question from my show notes.
and great questions, by the way. Very
Thank
well
you.
thought out questions. I think you covered a lot of ground. I appreciate all the work you put into this. And
Thank
my goal is to enlarge this think tank and all of our combined audiences into a large enough aggregate that it becomes a self-aware demographic, the parallel media, which is you have the mainstream alternative. This would be a third branch. And once it becomes self-aware, there'll be other think tanks. It'll splinter. It'll be out of our control. And that's what we want to happen. We want to release the Kraken and then see what happens. I think that auto hoaxing, media skepticism could be a world stage changing philosophy, almost like what I don't know how to explain it other than because it hasn't really happened, but I say neo enlightenment, just a rational alternative to the brainwashing. But I think if we get big enough, they won't be able to censor it, and
Mhm.
that is always a thing. And they don't have to censor you overtly. They can just send in armies of trolls and be disruptors. So my objective though is to get this thing so big they can't stop it.
Yeah, yeah. We will try our best to spread the word. I'll try my best to at least get uh, and more, not like, I have a lot of American listeners, but I also have a lot of Canadian people in Muslim countries. A lot of my people in my server are from all over the world, so definitely this is helping in spreading the word. And where can we find you, Tim? Next, you have anything planned uh, for the immediate future?
Yes, the auto hoax cons are meant to promote the auto hoaxology 101, and the immediate future is the 30th of this month. At the end of the month, we're going to have another one of those events. And I also want to make the point that I'm going to be obviously listing links to your channel
Thank
on
you.
my when I upload this, and I want to really kind of get people to start supporting like-minded channels because we really can build a network off of this, and people can find everything like the hub for the IPS at ips.monster, and I chose the domain .monster because the IPS I think is the Indian Police Services, and monster is kind of like our manifesto. Uh, we need to make this thing into a monster, and I think it will become something because alternative media is just awash with misinformation, mind junk, Q and nonsense. And here we have a rational alternative of what you could consider to be a more of a philosophical organization than political. And a lot of people might find that refreshing. So yeah, I am hoping that we can continue this, and we'll have to talk again in the future. But I like
Absolutely.
the idea of let's go ahead and support all of our channels mutually if we're on the same sheet more or less, because the more people get involved in the think tank, the faster things seem to progress.
Yes, if there's a virus, this is it. All right, Tim. I'm gonna let you go. I'm just gonna have a little final thoughts with the chat. This was great. Thank you so much for allowing me to ask you all these questions and for you know answering questions from my chat as well. Uh, don't think I have anything else to add. Lots of love to all. Thank you. I see a lot of new faces here. Welcome aboard. You can browse around, get a feel of the channel. Like Tim said, we're very like-minded. Thank you so much, Tim. Uh, if you're able to get on his Discord server, go. You will see what I mean. Go on his Substack, his Twitter. Catch him on his live streams. Uh, uh, Become a member in his channel, and just help fight against what we consider to be this mainstream monopolization of information. So let's just look at chat. I appreciate it, Rebecca. You had a chance to hop on board. You are more than welcome, Infinite Plane Society. I'm going to leave all your links in the description. So if you need to see all of his compendium of works, that's where you find it. Thank you so much, Silas. So basically, what I intend to do is bring forth a compendium of like-minded people, right? I brought in Armin, Silas, Tim. I have another person in mind. I've given him an invite. He's a fellow Canadian fakeologist. He also has a platform, a very comprehensive platform, and I benefit a lot from his presentations, his interviews. So make sure to subscribe, catch me. Hopefully, I do get a hold of Fakeologist. If not, just go subscribe to Fakeologist. You'll probably find me in the chat. Alaikum salam, Hannah. Uh, it's all right. This is going to be kept up. I'm not putting this behind the vault, so you can rewind and catch all the questions we've asked. We covered a lot today. Thank you. Thank you, Clockwork. Linda. I appreciate that, IPS. In the future, I understand it was short notice, Rebecca, but I don't want us to get rusty. We had a good flow back in May, June. Afwan, afwan, habibi. Shukran means thank you. All right, guys. So I think we're done. Thank you so much for tuning in. Keep in mind, we are a monetized channel. We rely on your memberships, super chats, and so on and so forth. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.